All right, welcome back to this week's Community Preparedness for the week ending June 18th, 2026. So I'm Aaron Asay, the Executive Director of our disaster nonprofit, Jase Response. So this week, the overall threat level remains elevated. The biggest risks facing most American families, they're not terrorism or war. Really, it's severe weather, healthcare disruptions, cyber incidents, and localized emergencies that can affect daily life with little warning. All right, so consider that we have current and active medication shortages to some very common medications. Things like Azithromycin, which is a common antibiotic, estrogen. Consider having a stockpile if you use those medications or any medication really. So creating a family emergency information binder, that's what's going to be this week's hot button topic for preparedness. Gather copies of your insurance policies, medical information, prescription lists, identification documents, emergency contacts, banking information, property records. You should store them in a waterproof folder. Place a digital copy in a USB encrypted drive. So during evacuations, cyber incidents, power outages, or medical emergencies, access to critical information often becomes more important than access to equipment. Now, on the supply front, if you take chronic medications, consider building a 90-day supply to have on hand in case of emergency. So let's start with the weather. Weather remains the most likely threat to impact Americans this week. Extreme heat, it continues across portions of the South and the Midwest. Really, it's kind of everywhere in the nation right now. And severe thunderstorms, flash flooding, tornadoes, wildfire conditions, those go along with it. So early hurricane season activity in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, that deserves attention. As a strengthening El Niño, it's continuing to form. So watch for heat warnings, wildfire growth, and tropical development over the next coming days. Now, if you're in the Rocky Mountain corridor, there are a number of active wildfires. And if you're in the area of one, consider having an evacuation plan and be ready. So for healthcare, we've got some biological threats. The overall risk remains guarded. Things like H5N1, the avian influenza, continues to be monitored, while we also have localized measles outbreaks that remain active in some communities. And healthcare cyber attacks, medication shortages, those remain more likely to affect Americans than a major disease outbreak anyway. So Ebola, that remains in the headlines internationally. You need to watch for travelers from Uganda and the DRC. Current risk to Americans remains low, but health officials continue monitoring for signs of global spread, which hasn't been seen yet. So cybersecurity, that remains an elevated concern. Ransomware groups, criminal organizations, they continue targeting healthcare systems and local governments and critical infrastructure. For most families, cyber threats are more likely to appear as like service outages, financial fraud, data breaches, or perhaps disruptions to your healthcare services. Now, domestic security, that remains elevated. Authorities recently disrupted an alleged plot involving drones and long-range sniper attacks against a major public event. Now, while no specific threat exists against the public, lone actors, small extremist cells, drone-enabled attacks, those remain among the most realistic security concerns. And large sporting events, concerts, transportation hubs, other crowded venues, they continue to attract attention from bad actors. The recent thwarted plots against the UFC at the White House, that should give everybody reason to pause and reassess. Now, civil unrest, that remains guarded. Most demonstrations across the country, they continue to be peaceful. However, immigration issues, Middle East tensions, election-related concerns, those all could create localized flashpoints. The greatest risk remains traffic disruptions, property damage, and isolated acts of violence. Now, internationally, the recent Iran ceasefire has reduced immediate escalation risks. But the situation remains fragile. Americans are more likely to feel the effects through energy prices, cybersecurity, activity, economic volatility, supply chain disruptions, than through direct attacks. Now, while gas prices may come down a bit, overall prices for goods will likely continue to rise for the foreseeable future. So on the economic front, inflationary pressures, transportation disruptions, and energy market volatility, that continues to pose a challenge. Now, while widespread shortages are unlikely, localized disruptions can develop quickly following major storms, cyber incidents, or international crises. So the bottom line this week, it's pretty straightforward. Most likely, disruptions facing Americans, they remain weather-related emergencies. They remain healthcare disruptions, cyber incidents, and maybe localized public safety events. So focus on practical resilience, small improvements made consistently each week. Those create meaningful preparedness over time. So stay aware, stay prepared. I'll see you next week.